So why don't we just start by having you each introduce yourself and say why you're running, and Ariel, will start with you, and then we'll flop first back and forth.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Ari, or Ariel Mendez, and I have a vision for Bend that I hope to bring to the voters, one that is more equitable, safer, more affordable, more walkable, and more bikeable. My wife Suzanne and I have 3 kids, and they're all in different schools right now, so transportation is often at the top of our minds. But I like to think in terms of what works for kids, and I think that if we can build a city that works for kids, it's going to work for everybody else. I was elected to the Parks District Board in 2019, where I have worked to expand our urban trail system. We had the highest number of families in the Recreation Scholarship Program recently. We had some grant funding available during the pandemic to expand support for Kids Inc. The Park District is Central Oregon's largest child care provider, and I have worked to support ways of expanding that as well, because there's so much need. I've heard of families that can't work because they can't find child care. So I've been really proud of what we've accomplished on the Parks District side, and I'd like to bring that experience and priority over to the city, where the city has a lot on its plate. It's got a lot going on. Some of the things that I think we have an opportunity for are things around like transportation. I've helped the Park District think not just in terms of how we can build great amenities, parks and facilities, but how people are getting there too. So I think that's probably Bend's biggest opportunity, and that's why I'm running for City Council.
Great.
Okay. Well, my name's Sean Sipe. I'm a longtime Bend local. I grew up out in Tumalo. I graduated Mountain View High School. And Bend is really near and dear to my heart. I love this community. I love this town. And I genuinely feel that there's no better place on earth to live. The last couple of years, Bend has been changing rapidly. Some for the better, some for the worse. I've heard over the last few years from many, many residents that they have felt unheard by our leadership and our current council, which is what prompted me to step up. I believe City Council is supposed to have varying and diverse voices coming from varying and diverse backgrounds. Many of the folks that I talk to, and as I walk our neighborhoods and go door to door asking what concerns they're facing, many of those folks have told me they have felt unheard over the last couple of years, that City Council has had one mind and one voice, which has resonated in the fact that most of the consensus in the votes that were taken over the last 2 years were unanimous, all 7 members voting the same. And so I'm coming to council with the hope of shaking it up a little bit, bringing some background in business, bringing a background that is different than the political sphere, to bring an additional voice, because I believe all 7 voices should be unique and varied so that we can represent our community as a whole. What I'd like to do is bring the businesses that make our city great to the table. A lot of our businesses have felt underrepresented, and their voices have been lost. And so my background is in real estate and business development, and I'd like to support a thriving economic center in Central Oregon to be able to bring the ability for new jobs and be able to afford health care and child care of the employees. But the only way to do that is through thriving business, and so I'd like to encourage that.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. You want to kick off with your one?
So it's a good follow-up to this introductory one, and we're going the opposite, or?
Yeah, Sean was okay.
Sure.
Tell us what your vision is for Bend going forward into the future, and be specific. As much as you can.
My vision for Bend. Well, as I touched on, I would like to see it be a thriving economic center. I believe that in order to support all of the lifestyle and activities that we all love and enjoy about Central Oregon, we need to have job growth, and we need to have strategic development that can support the influx of people that are moving here. As I said, I love Bend, and nationally everybody seems to, and are coming here. And so through strategic development, we can build the job growth needed to support that. We can build on the infrastructure needed to support that. We can accommodate in housing for all levels of income. But that will take specific development to do that, and it'll take a mindset of how to manage the economic side, fiscally responsible with our taxpayer dollars to accommodate those goals. Does that address the question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so my vision for Bend is one that is more affordable, one that prioritizes safe and effective transportation, and focuses on quality of life for children. Why children, you might ask? And as I mentioned before, a city that works for children will work for everyone, and that's true no matter whether you're a person with disabilities trying to get around or an older adult who is worried about living independently. Affordability is the #1 challenge right now in Central Oregon, and this isn't unique to Central Oregon, but the cost of housing is very high. It's the #1 cost in terms of percent of income spent for the average household, somewhere upwards of 35%. But the #2 cost is transportation. So I do think that we're doing a lot on the housing front. Expanding supply is important. That's the most effective way to address affordability, and it's also the most important way to help people stay off the streets. Homelessness is very connected to the cost of housing, and anything that we can do to bring the cost of housing down is going to help people off the streets. On the transportation side, this is an opportunity to do things differently. We've had decades of investment in car infrastructure, so much that really it's the default way that most people feel is a safe and effective way to get around. We know from experience in other cities that we can do things differently. We can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we can make it safer, and we can reduce the amount of time it takes to get places. So I see that as Bend's biggest opportunity, transportation. And lastly, it's focusing on the quality of life that we've all come to know and love here in Bend. And that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So that's my vision for Bend, one that is more affordable, with safer and more effective transportation, and focusing on quality of life.
Well, of course, we're gonna jump around and touch on a lot of the stuff you both already talked about. So, you know, if it's repeats, don't worry. We like hearing it again. So we'll start talking about homelessness, and you know, this is a significant issue facing all the communities in Oregon. We'll start with Ariel with this one. What do you believe is the city's role specifically in trying to address this issue?
Sorry, what do I believe?
What do you believe is the city's role specifically in trying to address homelessness?
Good question, and I apologize, I wear hearing aids, and sometimes I have to ask people to repeat themselves, but this is a hard problem, and it's one that the city can't solve by itself. This is one reason why the initiatives from one of our state legislators, Jason Kropf, is so important, bringing in a navigation center, bringing in a coordinated response that helps us get on the same page at the state level, the county level, and at the city level. This is somewhat new territory for the city. The city is kind of the kitchen sink of districts. It's not always been seen as in the responsibility of what the city does, but the city has a responsibility to regulate the right-of-way. The public right-of-way is not an ideal place or the appropriate place to meet people's housing needs. I don't think that people camping in the public right-of-way, in tents, in residential neighborhoods, or near schools is an acceptable solution. So in the long term, we need to talk about housing. Expanding the housing supply is the best way to address affordability, and the evidence is very strong that shows that is the #1 way to affect the number of people that are houseless, living on the streets. In the short term, we need to keep expanding shelter space. The city has done some great things. Just last week, we had another village opening up with 20 pallet structures. I like what they've done with the Rainbow Motel. If you look at it in terms of price per bed, it's actually pretty reasonable. We need more of that. So taking the long-term and the short-term aspects, it's not going to happen overnight. This is a hard problem, but that's the direction that we need to head in.
Sean, and anytime you guys want to repeat the question, happy to do that.
No, I got it. the topic of homelessness comes up a lot. And over the last 2 years, particularly a lot. Certainly the perception of our town is that the homeless population has grown exponentially. Now we've done studies on what the actual population is, time and place studies, and it's hovering right around 1,100 or so in the Bend area. However, what it feels like is that more homeless have moved into the core of our town, and it seems that that is in response to our council's decisions to welcome the homeless population in, almost becoming a refuge city where our homeless know that our right-of-way policies are not being enforced, that our laws are not being strictly enforced, and it has led to what many residents would say is a degradation of our downtown area. People are not liking the direction that Bend is heading, and I'm hearing it time and time again. I think the city can address the homeless issue, and I think we need to do it by not taking a broad stroke approach, which is what has been happening, but recognizing that homeless individuals are just that. They're individuals with individual needs and varying desires for what they see their life to be. You can break down the homeless population into a couple of different groups, and I'm going to have to do it quickly with only 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The first group, I think all of us should be able to say, is not acceptable within our town, and those are a criminal element that is perpetrating crime on our most vulnerable community members. The rest of the homeless population, as well as our community at large. And that is happening. The second is what I would refer to as voluntary camping. This is those that are exploiting our system. They are taking advantage of the generosity of our town, and they are sucking off of the resources from those who could genuinely use it, which is the next portion. Those who want and need help and will, 3 seconds,
Yeah,
and
will finish.
will receive the help if given. By eliminating the first two portions, we can strategically address our efforts to those who genuinely need it and want it, which frees up the last portion, which is those suffering from mental health, the hardest portion to address. And without the tax of the first roughly 90% of the homeless population, we can really get in, and through collaboration with our county and state officials, we can address that problem.
Great, thanks, Sean.
I wanted to, any rebuttals for you?
No.
I wanted to just ask a follow-up because I think it's important in this dialogue about enforcement of the right-of-way. So I'll just start with you because you mentioned it. What is your approach on enforcing enforcing no camping in the right-of-way? We know that the city's in the midst of changing their rules around that. There's going to be more strictures around where that can happen. What do we do next to enforce that?
So, good question. I do think that people have an obligation to respect the public right-of-way. I think that, if we're talking about children, people living in neighborhoods, there's a right to feel safe in your neighborhood. I don't want to see things like needles in parks or people using illicit drugs at playgrounds. And fortunately, we don't have a lot of that going on in Bend so far. I do also, there's an obligation on the one hand to respect the public space, but there's also an obligation from the city's perspective and the county and the state's perspective to make sure that society is also providing options that are humane. So if there is an option for someone to go and spend the night, I do think that people have a right to eat a meal in peace and quiet, and a right to feel secure, so that if they go to a shelter, that they're not worried about being assaulted or abused. So there's rights that travel in both directions. I think that as a city, we need to keep heading in the direction of making sure that shelter space is available and adequate, so that people on the streets don't feel like they're better off sleeping in the right-of-way. So it's a balance, and there are rules going both ways, rules and obligations that I think are often missing from this conversation, but form the basis of a balanced response.
Sean?
Absolutely.
Right-of-way.
Right of way. I think Bend as a whole would agree that it is not humane to allow people to live outside in a four-season town like ours. Tragically, we have seen deaths happening over the last few years of our homeless population because of inclement weather. I think that we need to take a hardline stance on saying camping outside in the city limits will not be permitted, and make sure that the shelter availability is there. We have some fantastic nonprofits locally that do have availability, and I think we need to work collaboratively with them to expand that availability, make sure that there is a place to go, and make sure that anybody living outside knows what those resources are, is given the opportunity to take advantage of them. And if they're choosing not to, and yes, they do need to be safe, secure places to go, which places like Bethlehem Inn and Shepherd's House excel at. They're fantastic organizations. So I resonate with that thought. If they are still choosing not to participate in the options that are available to them, then we need to look at whether or not they should be here.
What does that mean exactly? You mentioned the first two types where we should eliminate them. I'm just curious what that verb actually means for you.
When I said eliminate earlier, I was saying eliminate the eliminate the tax on our system. So we have a lot of nonprofits, and we have a lot of city money going towards helping this population as a whole. What I was saying is eliminate the cost associated with supporting a demographic, not eliminating
Okay.
We knew you were talking about.
That's helpful.
It's
I mean,
Yeah.
No, that's great to
No, that
clarify.
was clear.
Thank you so
No,
much.
that was clear.
I was trying to say eliminate the cost associated with directing what are limited resources, and there are
Okay.
limited resources, towards a populace that doesn't necessarily want a hand up. They're more looking for a handout to maintain that lifestyle. I don't think that's the city's job. I think the city's job is to help those who genuinely want help.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you for the question.
Quick follow-up on that?
Sure.
So I'm surprised to hear discussion of taking advantage of the system somehow, that houseless people are using the current system to their advantage, or sucking off resources was a surprising turn of phrase. The Martin versus Boise District Court, Federal District Court decision, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with, obligates the city to make sure that shelter space is available before saying you cannot sleep here. We cannot criminalize poverty out of existence. It doesn't work. So if we look at what is effective, that's where the hard conversation is. Like, what does that shelter space actually look like? Is there space for someone who has a pet? Is there space for personal belongings? These are the hard questions that are going to make the difference between a policy that will be both constitutional in terms of upholding the Eighth Amendment, but also effective in terms of conditions on our streets.
John, did you
Yeah,
have-
absolutely. Thank you for bringing up Boise. That's the whole reason for the provision of time, place, and manner. And so as long as there are beds available, it has been determined that we can say, hey, you can't be living in the elements in what many would say is inhumane conditions when there are beds available. Choosing to continue in that lifestyle shouldn't be permitted. We should make sure that they have the resources available and that they are utilizing them. And we can restrict that through time, place, and manner, just as the Boise lawsuit determined. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay. Changing just a bit, Sean, this question we'll start with you. What is your approach to improving multimodal transportation in Bend, i.e. bike and bus transit?
Absolutely. I think that we live in a community of varying needs. Everybody has different ways that they like to transport themselves across town. My focus would be first and foremost on the quality of our roads, because that does address the needs of the largest portion of our community. In doing so, and increasing the flow of traffic on the main arterial roads, it's going to reduce the traffic impacts on the side roads and the neighborhoods, which in turn increases safety for pedestrians, for children that are playing in those neighborhoods, for the elderly going out to get their mail, for those riding bicycles on those secondary roads, drastically increases the safety. And so when we look at doing things like producing specified bike paths. I would say those should not be on the arterial roads, which are primarily there for the free flow of commerce and emergency response. So we should not be limiting the flow of traffic. We should make sure that we have roads in excellent condition so that we're not hindered by constant traffic delays from construction and so forth. And that we should focus on bike and pedestrian paths in the neighborhoods and on the secondary roads where they are inherently safer.
Ariel, you need me to repeat the question?
Well, of course, I love this question. I think this is probably the thing that I'm best known for. I do ride a bike a lot in town, and in fact, I've got 2 soccer teams worth of gear on a cargo bike just out front, and I'll be heading over there to the soccer field to coach after we wrap up here. But the hardest principle in transportation is that if you want to make conditions better for people driving, we really have to make conditions better for not driving first. This is the opportunity that Bend has, and this is the opportunity that most other cities in our country have missed. Everywhere we look at more lanes, adding more capacity, more parking, and this is not an economically viable solution, and it's not a solution if we want an effective transportation system. So when we look forward and talk about adding 50,000 more people to Bend in the next 20 years, we just don't have space for 50,000 more drivers as well. I mean, it's just a geometry problem. Bend is not that big. So we're talking about how do we get people around without driving. Last year, I was proud to partner with Councilor Anthony Broadman to propose Bend's first separated and protected network for bikes, the Bend Bikeway, we called it. And I think this would make a really big difference. Think of like a bike superhighway that if you could get on it, you would feel safe and secure getting anywhere in town from north to south or east to west. That is the shift that I think we need, where we can make sure that our land use is prioritizing things like walkable neighborhoods with amenities close by so that people don't feel like the only option is to drive places. So I think we have to talk about how do we make it safe and convenient for people not driving in order to make it better for people that still do rely on driving.
Go ahead, Judy.
Going down the list.
Going down.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So, sort of switching gears a little bit. If inflation continues to grow and/or a recession occurs, how do you see the city helping? Where do you see the city's role?
And
So-
Ariel starts with you.
Yeah, so I do think actually transportation plays a big part of this. I mean, if we look at communities that are coming out of the pandemic, the ones that are the most economically vibrant are the ones that are giving people other options to get around, especially when gas is $5 or more a gallon. I had a friend, my daughter's friend lives in Redmond, and when I offered to pick them up in our electric car, the parents were elated, and I was like, why are they so excited? That seems really puzzling. And then I realized it's because if you're driving a gas guzzler like a Suburban, that's $10 round trip. So the cities that provide options for people to actually get around, live their lives, go out to dinner, get to work, get to school, in a way that is less costly are the ones that do the best. And I think that's what the empirical record shows, and that's the opportunity that we have here in Bend as well. The other thing that I would like to say is the city plays a big role in providing resources and assistance to small businesses. Working with the small businesses, which are the largest aggregate employer in Central Oregon, the city can provide education and a guide to resources which are necessary in times of recovery.
Sean?
Yeah. So while budgeting and reducing expenses do play a role in helping get through a recession, really what we need is economic growth in every facet that we can bring to the table. This is exactly why we need to be supporting our local small businesses even more, making sure that they have a voice at the table and not just pursuing things like multimodal transportation, which admirable goal, but does not get us through a recession. We need to do things like expand parking downtown so that the businesses that are currently in operation can have the customer base freely able to access their businesses. I'm hearing from many businesses downtown a frustration with their customers not being able to park. And as we go further into a recession, I believe that we are in a recession and likely will continue to be, they are concerned that there's just not enough parking downtown. It's become too much of a hindrance and it's affecting their businesses. We need to put strong city support behind our small businesses. And that does help us. That provides jobs. That provides income for our residents. It is through business that you actually produce money that rides you through a recession. It is not just through budgetary cost cuts.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm puzzled over the suggestion that we need to expand parking downtown, because expanding parking is extremely costly. The city-owned parking garage in today's dollars costs about $18 to $20 million to construct. Where's that money going to come from? I mean, it costs a tremendous amount, and the empirical record shows that parking is not what makes downtown vibrant or economically successful. People are. So any way that we can bring people in, especially if it doesn't cost an arm and a leg in terms of parking, is going to be tremendous for businesses' bottom lines. And that's what we see in other places too.
Sean, you want to-
Absolutely, yeah. So bringing people into downtown, the cost of parking. We are predominantly run off tourism. Tourists, by and large, come here by car. Even if they do fly to Bend, they tend to rent a car. Now, some of them, when they're staying in housing downtown, may be able to ride a bike, but our city council is currently trying to eliminate more short-term rentals in those areas that would be totally viable for being able to ride a bike downtown. What I'm talking about, though, is the parking immediately in front of the businesses. And the complaints I'm hearing are with those parking restrictions that were put in during the COVID era, where restaurants are allowing seating, taking up a number of places out front. We have parking spaces available. I know it's a contentious point of whether or not we restrict that, but what I'm hearing from businesses downtown is a frustration that we have limited our on-street parking that has caused a direct economic impact on the business.
Just for clarification, you're hearing that the downtown businesses are, you're talking about the podlets and expect opening more of that, okay. Ariel, can you respond to that real quick on the podlets? I mean, because
Yeah, I
They
mean,
are
I
taking
think
up
that they've been
parking.
fantastic, and I think that the best thing that we could do is actually find ways of meeting businesses' needs in expanding the program. And I think those are the programs that kept our restaurants downtown alive. I do recognize there are some inequities. I mean, some businesses may feel like, hey, I can't take advantage of that.
Sure.
So working with businesses to try to meet individual business needs is something that is a challenge and absolutely needs to happen. But I would definitely not talk about eliminating those podlets for additional parking. What we've actually seen is, since the city has introduced them, the turnover has increased. It's tripled in the time if we look at the pre-pandemic time, 2019 to today. So there's actually more parking turnover going on, which is better for businesses' bottom lines, not worse.
Quick fact check, they're called parklets.
Parklets, thank you.
oh, sorry.
Thanks, Jack.
Podlet.
I tried with you.
Yeah, you
was
tried. That's language.
I mean,
you know what I meant.
I could correct,
I was
but
gonna say, I've never heard of those before.
podlets, that's interesting. Jetsons.
Pods are lets already,
Yes,
they're
I
small.
already, I guess I've been saying that wrong for 2 years now. Okay,
I was just saying that that is a concern that has come up time and again by businesses.
Sure.
And I'm just
Absolutely.
pointing that
Yeah.
out, that it should be a discussion, because that's what businesses are talking about.
yeah, totally understand. It is controversial.
So I think we're at Sean with this one. I'd love to have you say something you appreciate about your opponent in this race.
Absolutely. I appreciate your dedication to your cause. You really genuinely believe that what you're bringing to the table will benefit our city. And so while we may disagree on some things, I appreciate the spirit behind it.
I appreciate that. Same question for
Ariel.
you. I
Same
presume.
question for you.
You know, I think that it's really important for voters to have choices in elections, and it takes a lot to run for office, and I really appreciate that you have stepped up and that you're running for this office. I think that's really commendable.
Thank you, guys. So last question, or second to last question, we like to slip something, at least a little bit of fun in there. So Ariel, I think this one's over to you. Where would someone find you hanging out on a Friday night, not during election season, after this whole thing wraps up?
Lately, you know, with 3 young kids, I've got an 8-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 14-year-old. Lately, we've been watching some family movies. Hocus Pocus 2 was a recent favorite. Did you see it?
No, I'm just laughing.
Yeah,
A lot of
well-
rhetoric going on.
Oh, there's a lot of our staff that's all fired up about Hocus Pocus too, so.
Well, no, I think it's worth discussing
right.
too, right? There's a lot going on there. But yeah, no, we've had a lot of fun. As my kids get older, I think about, gosh, they're not going to be around forever, and what a privilege it is to be able to spend time with them, and I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to spend that time. So my wife may be working nights or during the day; she has a really irregular schedule, but I feel pretty grateful to have that time with them.
Sean, Friday night?
Yeah, Friday night. I really like Brother Jones on Galveston. I joke, but Friday night tends to be day night for me, and we go out and we support our local dining establishments. We have some of the best food in the country. We have some awesome restaurants, and so Friday night would be spent doing that. But it would typically be going to a restaurant after a hike, or after a kayak, or after going fly fishing on the river. You know, we try and pack some fun and adventure in, and then unwind with a nice meal.
Great, thank you.
So we want to, we know that was fast and furious and not a whole lot of questions, so I know there's probably a lot left on the table in terms of city policy, so as we let you do your wrapping up statement, if there's any other topic that you wanted to discuss and bring up, I'd be happy to hear that. Sean, we're going to give you the 2 minutes starting off.
Okay. As I mentioned, I do work in real estate, and the conversation of affordable and workforce housing is one that comes up over and over and over again. I don't feel like we got to fully elaborate on that. I believe that if you work 40 hours a week, you should be able to live here in Bend. I believe that we need to put systems in place that allow those who are making plus or minus 20% of the median income to be able to either rent or own housing. And I think that the city can and should take a proactive stance in creating workforce housing so that we can have thriving businesses that can be fully employed and we can ride through a recession.
Anything else you want to say in terms of your candidacy, or you know, this is your chance to share?
Just
anything.
throw myself out
Yeah,
there.
we'll share your website or anything like that as well.
Sure. My website is sipeforbend.com, SIPEFOR, Bend, BEND.com. And again, I'm in this to bring a voice for our community to the table, to make sure that there is a diversity of voices in City Council that are serving the community that has felt unheard over the last several years. And so please consider me on November 8th as a new voice for City Council, seat 5 in Bend.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, we live in a really unequal society. When a new house is built in Bend, sometimes it might sell for as much as $2 million, but given the state's property tax laws, it's only going to be assessed for the first less than $1 million. So that's over $1 million that are not assessed value, that the city doesn't get any revenue from. And that, by and large, benefits the wealthiest. I support SDC reform. I support property tax reform. Some of that is within the city's purview. When we talk about something like investing in better walking or biking or zoning for more convenient 15-minute neighborhoods, sometimes people ask, you know, how are you going to pay for that, Ariel? What is that going to cost us? And frankly, it's going to cost us less than what we're currently doing, because what we're currently doing is we're making assumptions about how people get around. And if we keep making the same assumptions, well, that's how we get to the $1 billion unfunded estimate for our transportation needs. If we talk about reallocating our public right-of-way in a way that is more economical, safer, more efficient, has more benefits for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually going to cost us less. I mean, these are the kinds of investments that cities that don't have a lot of money make, and they still make ends meet. Their commerce is thriving and vibrant, and it's in part because they don't have to drive for every single trip. So I think that I can bring a vision that I hope is attractive to people, and also the experience to demonstrate how we can achieve it. I feel like I'm a known quantity. I've been around serving our community for a long time, and I hope to continue to do that and be that voice on City Council. And my website is arielforbend.com.